The war is over, or at least war is over, or at least war as a serious subject for Hollywood movies, at least war in any kind of, I would say, realistic, truthful, or profound way.
We're very pleased to launch today. Conflict and war and culture are all changing pretty rapidly in our own lifetime. And when we talk about culture, we're interested in all aspects of modern culture. And of course, war and culture are intrinsically connected. Going back to the Iliad, is a complete connection between war and culture and the way it's interpreted. But that relationship always needs to be reinterpreted and rethought, and that's what we want to do in this series. And so our idea is to deal with some of the people in the creative industries, in media, sport, theatre, but the performing arts, and in film. And today in particular, we wanted to deal with film, and I'm delighted that we're launching the series with the film director John Amiel and the producer Dave Brown. We are much taken by some of the trivial links in this, as well as the very serious ones. The trivial links are that John was one of the directors of The Tudors, which is showing downstairs. And this, as people here will have heard me say many, many times, this is the site of Henry VIII's bedroom in the old Palace of Whitehall. At this elevation, exactly this elevation, about 2 feet this way, this was the bedroom he died in. Not the bedroom he bedded Anne Boleyn in, but the bedroom he died in. Because the Whitehall Palace ran from the Ministry of Defence now, and it ran all right through to the other side of Downing Street, and there was the main corridor, the Privy Corridor, ran along that side of the building. And on this side of the Privy Corridor were all the private rooms, all the reception rooms. And this happened to be the site of the bedroom. It disappeared in the final Great Fire of Whitehall in 1698. And I wish there was even a tiny bit of it left so that we could put it in a glass case and say, this is the remains of Henry VIII's bedroom. Yes, but there's none of it left. However, it's interesting. And the other side of that wall is the banqueting house where the first performance of The Tempest and the first performance of King Lear were given, the old Elizabethan banqueting house. And John has links to the RSC, the Royal Shakespeare Company, which I know will be of more than passing interest. But I'm going to ask John to start and then Dave to take up some themes in making a few comments. John Amiel is one of the Brits in Hollywood who have made such an enormous difference. If I say to people in this audience The Singing Detective, many in this audience will know that that was a landmark series on British television, Dennis Potter series that he directed. He is also responsible for some of the Tudors, from the Borgias. But in film terms, you'll know his films, Creation, Entrapment, Somersby, The Core, Copycat. And in particular, we're interested in a project that he's got at the moment, 105 Degrees and Rising, about the American withdrawal from Vietnam, which I know is a script that's caused quite a buzz in Hollywood. And he's working on, as I understand it, making that. He's also working on a piece called Breaking News about war correspondence. He's a man who thinks deeply about not just the art of filmmaking and the art of theatricality, but also its relationship with the real world. And that's one of the things that we're very interested in. So, John, the floor is yours, sir.
A couple of weeks back, I was part of a group of writers, actors, and directors that were invited to meet Michelle Obama at a special event. There were a bunch of equally charismatic, because she is extremely charismatic, equally charismatic servicemen and women on the rostrum. And the burden of their song was to encourage us as storytellers to tell real stories about the servicemen and women out there, and also about their families, their lives, and their predicaments. They wanted to encourage us to tell better, truer, deeper stories. I'm going to come back to Mrs. Obama in a little bit, but I sort of feel it incumbent upon me, before I go any further, to make a few disclaimers here. Firstly, I've never made a movie about war. I've made movies about wars of the sexes. I've made a movie that finished with the Civil War. I've made movies of war on crime. Never war per se. I've actually failed, currently at least, to make 2 movies that have war themes, both of which Mike mentioned. And I think, in a sense, those failures will, in a way, prove more illuminating to you than maybe a couple of my successes might have done. I'll also come back to those too, once I've finished disclaiming. My second disclaimer is that I was suckered into this talk. I was told by the wonderful Alison Barry and the extremely plausible Michael Clark that this was going to be an informal little chat. You know, when he says it with that accent, you just believe it, really, in front of some of his younger members. And, it was only when I arrived here I was welcomed to the inaugural lecture. So this really isn't a lecture, I'm afraid to say. This is not some well-honed axe that I've been going around grinding, some well-polished presentation with clips and PowerPoints and all the rest of it. I apologize. You know, what I think I do have to bring to this particular table is the perspective of a Brit over there. In other words, an insider's experience with, I think, something of an outsider's perspective. And, that coupled with the opportunity uniquely given and gratefully seized to talk to you lot is one that I relish enormously. So, if this were a presentation, and I needed to give it a title, I would probably go to that great and illustrious Englishman, Mr. Basil Fawlty, for my title. And I would entitle this, Don't Mention the War. And if I had an axe to grind or a serious point to make, I wonder whether I do, but I'll try, it would probably go something like this. The war is over. Or at least war is over. Or at least war as a serious subject for Hollywood movies. At least war in any kind of, I would say, realistic, truthful, or profound way. Why, of course, is the interesting question. Although American servicemen are risking their lives on a daily basis in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and elsewhere, and I'm going to talk largely from the perspective of over there, partly because of my meeting with Mrs. Obama, partly because I think it's probably refreshing for you to get a sense of what the perspective of the movie-making machine over there is. By Hollywood, I really am talking about the majors and the mini-major studios. The Oscars, which we tend to think of as Hollywood, are kind of misleading because, as we'll come to discuss later, that's not most of what you're seeing on the Oscars, unfortunately, is not the product of the major studios. It's usually the product of impassioned, eccentric, wayward individuals who've sometimes fought for years to get their damn movies made. You see them on the red carpet, you see them getting their Oscars, and you think this is Hollywood. But the realities are sort of somewhat different. War movies or war-themed movies have been as much a staple of Hollywood fare, the major mainstream production of Hollywood films, since about 1915, when D.W. Griffith made Birth of a Nation, about which Woodrow Wilson said famously, although some say ambiguously, it was like writing history with lightning, which is an image I love. As a filmmaker, I think to be able to write history with lightning, what an incredible challenge. And as we continue to talk, I'm going to invite you to wonder how many films are actually writing history with lightning these days. Every decade and every generation has its different theme and its different take. And a sort of quick canter, I'm not going to give you a sort of history of cinema, but I have a point to make here. So it's interesting to look at how each successive decade, each successive generation, each successive socioeconomic pulse has its own sort of cloud pattern of movies that follow it. After the Great War of 1418, the 1920s and 1930s begat a series of deep, somber reflections on the true meaning of war. So many people came back traumatized by the war, by the casualty list. So films like All Quiet on the Western Front, What Price Glory, Big Parade, reflected this whole new attitude to war, a somber sense of realism, all of which had disappeared, in a sense, by the early 1940s. Europe went off to war, and England was making a series of actually really quite interesting and innovative war movies. But in America, who introduced conscription, or the draft as they call it, in 1940, it was kind of funny. So there was this whole slew of conscription comedies. Fred Astaire, Three Stooges, Abbott and Costello. It was funny. They were all sort of misfit soldiers. You're in the army now, and there's sort of some of the great titles like Boobs in Arms and Buck Privates were characteristic of that time, until 1941, December, Pearl Harbor, when, guess what, suddenly war wasn't funny anymore to America, and there was the predictable outpouring from the studios of flag-waving movies that were exhorting the qualities that were needed at the time, sort of cooperation of multi-ethnic groups, sort of ideas of leadership and self-sacrifice, and core themes like this came out. And so you could see, again, straight after that war, once again, the movies moved much more somber and reflective to deal with the real meaning of sacrifice, the cost to families, relationship of loyalty and patriotism to personal conscience. And some extraordinary movies were made at that time. Best Years of Our Lives, which is one of my great favorites. Home of the Brave, 12 O'Clock High, Run Silent, Run Deep, Here to Eternity, Caine Mutiny. Some extraordinary films. But again, what you see by the 60s is that affluence and a sense of optimism transmutes war from serious drama to action-adventure. And, of course, some of my favorite war films were made at that time. Guns of Navarone and Where Eagles Dare and all those great sort of spiffing yarns. And the great spectaculars as well, with Daryl Zanuck, all those Tora, Longest Day, Bridge Too Far, multi-stars, and No Expense Spared, spectacular. So you can see that in the 60s, how war literally became spectacle and it became action and adventure until the Vietnam War. And again, a tremendous shift as you see a lot of brilliant young American filmmakers make movies like Apocalypse Now and The Deer Hunter and Oliver Stone's early movies that came a bit later, and Coming Home, which was an incredible meditation on, the personal emotional consequences of war. So each decade, each generation has its war movies. By the late 90s, Steven Spielberg created this really sort of canny blend, didn't he, of old style themes of patriotism and self-sacrifice. He stirred it up with wonderful virtuoso cinematography and a very aggressive style, and a lot of the sort of blood, guts, snot, and all strategies of the new cinema. And he made a very successful film, I think, creatively and commercially. But where did that go? The real heirs and successors to Saving Private Ryan really are alive and well and living in television now. We can mention the war. Band of Brothers and The Pacific, for example, moved to television. While what you start to see in Hollywood proper is a slow and inexorable retreat from major motion pictures organized around the subject of war. Through the first decade of the new millennium, you see a bunch of really interesting war movies, I think. I mean, from, a lot of them are surreal. Men Who Stare at Goats, Three Kings, which are a wonderful anarchic film I love, to sort of Syriana, complex and labyrinthine, Jarhead. But increasingly, what you start to see is that these films are made outside the studio system by these passionate individuals I was talking about earlier. And they all had concomitantly smaller budgets, concomitantly smaller release patterns, and war suddenly starts to seem like an art house subject. But at least they were getting made. At least there were war movies out there. And where are we now? Looking at the state of Hollywood right now, we're fighting aliens, essentially. It's the Alien movie, is the war movie of the second decade, really. And these aren't the sort of nuanced, hyper-intelligent, misunderstood aliens of Spielberg's E.T. and Close Encounters. I mean, these are sort of evil, fiendish, arthropodic creatures. These are the War of the Worlds and Battle for LA and Cloverfield and Skyline and the ghastly, jingoistic, mechanistic automatons of Transformers with Optimus Prime in his red, white, and blue beating the shit out of the ghastly Decepticons who, I don't know if anyone's noticed this, but all have foreign accents, slightly foreign accents. Do you know what I mean? Just a slight Arabic, I see here sort of slight Arabic thing going on in there. So basically, xenophobia rules. And, America's war on terror has to have its cinematic avatars in those aliens who have to be terrifying, don't they? So what of Libya? What of Iraq? What of Afghanistan? What of all the people Mrs. Obama was exhorting us to think about? All the courageous men and women fighting real wars in the real world with real physical and emotional consequences. Silence from the studios, at least. Don't mention the war, seems to be the mantra. Are there exceptions? Yeah, there are a few. But I think they're the ones that tend to prove the rule. You for example, go to a studio executive and since he's a generic studio executive that I'm going to make up for, I'm just going to refer to him henceforth as the GSE, the generic studio executive. He'll do. I was going to call him Brad for no particular reason, but I just suddenly got afraid I was going to offend some studio executive called Brad. So I will call him the GSE for now. And you go and pitch your war movie. And you almost immediately see him start to do this. And the phrase that you will hear trotted out is, John, audiences won't support war movies. And I go, or the filmmaker goes, well, what about Inglourious Bastards? and your CSE will go, GSE, I'm sorry, I can't even remember my own acronyms. And I'm talking to a bunch of army folk. That's really bad. Your GSE will basically go, John, that wasn't so much a war movie as a Quentin Tarantino movie. You'll go, what about The Hurt Locker? 7 Oscars. A total of over nearly 150 nominations and awards worldwide. He goes, John, that awful smile that these executives seem to have perfected when they're dealing with these naive creative people. He'll go, John, The Hurt Locker was the lowest grossing Academy Award winner ever. And I'm afraid to say he's right. He's right. Do you know how much The Hurt Locker did? Worldwide, total business, $19 million. It's peanuts. It's nothing. To give you a benchmark, Big Mama's House 3. Well, that's more laughter than that movie got, let me tell you. One of the worst reviewed movies in movie history, Rotten Tomatoes, or Tomatoes as they call it over there, which is a sort of Metacritic compilation of all the reviews, had a positive review percentage of 5%. It made more than 5 times as much as The Hurt Locker worldwide, $89 million to be exact. So the question I sort of wanted to ask here was why? Obviously, we're in a recession. The politicians and the economists don't like us using the word depression. So I save that for my colleagues in the creative community. And recession culture begets escapism. You look at Busby Berkeley in the 30s and all the great musical comedies of the 30s. So it's understandable that people essentially want to surrender to the blessed darkness of the movie theatre in order to escape from all that perplexing, frightening, and worrying stuff outside. But unless they're Tropic Thunder, war movies are not essentially escapism. Right? And I'll invite you to think about them in a sense, because as I start to lay this out, I think you'll understand what the problems start to become. To think about them in a dramaturgical sense. War movies are essentially composed of 4 dramaturgical components, or genre components, if you like. Action, drama, politics, and period. Now, action, that's fine. Well, everybody likes action in Hollywood. Action is cool. As long as you don't try and get clever and do what Green Zone tried to do, which was basically make a serious and thoughtful and rather darkly cynical movie about the political landscape of war, which they then try to sell as from the director and actor and star of Bourne Identity. A very internet-savvy audience smell seriousness, they smell message, they stayed away. So action is fine as long as it's mindless, would seem to be the message from Hollywood. Drama. Oh, this is a shocker. Because drama, and believe me, I'm actually quoting, this is openly stated now. You'd think people would hang their head in shame but to admit this, but drama is the genre that dare not speak his name in Hollywood. I promise you, if you use the word drama in a pitch meeting, it's like making a joke about venereal disease at a christening. You will see everybody's faces set like stone, like the warriors facing the Gorgon. Drama is over in Hollywood right now. They do not want it. Again, as our GSC will tell you, drama is not supported by audiences at the moment. So you've got a big problem in telling those serious, thoughtful stories that Mrs. Obama wants us to tell. And by the way, we want to tell. Right there. Politics, forget it. It's hard to remember the last successful movie about politics. Anybody want to suggest one? I think the last one I can think of is Frost Nixon. Really good. Frost Nixon, bunch of awards. $26 million total at the box office. Not as bad as Hurt Locker, but no Big Mama's House 3. So you can see the problems already. And of course, if you're making a war about any war other than one that we're currently engaged in, which is almost certainly going to be drama and politics, it's going to be period. And period's another big problem for these guys. It's expensive, and audiences don't support period, by and large. So this brings me rather neatly, in a sense, to the two movies I failed to make. And I'll tell you briefly about them. They were, of course, masterpieces. I'll stick to that story. No, seriously, they're very, very highly regarded scripts. Got incredible response from the creative community, amazing response from actors, and lots of new jobs for the writers. So these are not chopped liver. These are really good, thoughtful, interesting scripts. The first is called 105 Degrees. And it's set in Saigon in the last 10 days before the so-called fall. The Americans call it fall. It's not what the Vietnamese call it. It was, we had a raft of really wonderful actors wanting to be involved. We had a mini major studio financing it. We went out, I auditioned actors. We went out to Thailand and Vietnam to scout locations. We secured unprecedented response from the Vietnamese government. So I just filmed the movie in its entirety in Vietnam. Never been done before. It was a measure of their belief in the script. And the story, very simply, it was about people in war. Soldiers, to be truthful, did not figure so large in it. We've seen a lot of great movies about soldiers in the battlefield in Vietnam. This was about people in a city at war. 8 characters, 2 of them Vietnamese, crisscrossing each other like Crash and converging on the embassy roof as the last helicopter is about to take off. That is, in a nutshell, was the story we wanted to tell. And it was a damn good story. What happened to it? Well, this was about 3 years ago. And in that year, while I was out scouting and all that was happening, about 5 movies about Iraq came out in rather quick succession. Lions for Lambs, In the Valley of Ella, Redacted, Rendition, The Kingdom. At worst, they were flops, and at best, they were severe disappointments, financially speaking. So, suddenly my phone stops ringing. And that's how you know that your movie's not going to happen. That's what happened with that. And more recently, I was working on a movie called Breaking the News, which is a wonderful, emotional, and highly charged story about two veteran war correspondents. Diane Lane and Dennis Quaid wanted to play the roles. Perfect casting for this movie. Not a high-budgeted movie, probably to be made for around the $15 million mark. It's peanuts. You know, Transformers cost $300 million, and probably about $150 million to market and sell, just in the United States. $15 million, very small budget for movie business. Anyway, the movie dealt with themes, the relationship between these two veteran war correspondents, their attempt to deal with the new infotainment age, the tabloidization of news, the ageism that now besets the news industry almost as much as it besets the movie industry, and the, I believe, unholy and unwholesome alliance between the US Army and the US media to ensure that we only get told what it is they want us to know. So it was dealing with a lot of quite interesting, complex, and provocative issues about press and about personal journeys. Too issue-driven is essentially the verdict that comes back from the foreign financiers who essentially determine whether or not a movie gets made nowadays. Since foreign financing now constitutes about 70% of the revenues of a movie. It used to be 40% barely 10 years ago. Now it's almost 70%. So the tail of foreign sales completely wags the dog of production. And this movie clearly, and as you can see from what I've laid out before, has several strikes against it. It's issue-driven. It's about people over 40. It has politics in it. And it's about journalists, and nobody gives a fuck about journalists, as we all know. Not in Hollywood films, anyway. They really don't. So it's a really... I always thought it was miraculous that somebody wanted to make this film. It turned out the miracles are rather rarer than I'd initially believed. So I think one has to ask, what of the future? You know, what is the future of the kind of movies that Mrs. Obama was talking to us about? You know, thoughtful, feelingful portrayals of men and women at war. Is there a possibility in the current economic climate that Hollywood will make films that both encourage a positive attitude to military service, while at the same time acknowledging the physical and emotional challenges that face those servicemen and their families and the people who love them and surround them? And here's the sad thing about that meeting, inspiring though it was. I don't remember, I could be wrong, but I don't remember seeing a single studio head at that meeting. Nor do I remember seeing a single one of those 25 or so actors whose assent to make a movie would guarantee that that movie got made. They're the ones that are bankable in terms of their foreign value. I thought I would love to direct a movie about this. I had writer friends who said, I want to write a movie like this. I have actor friends that said, yeah, I'll be in it, but actors will be in anything, as we know. But they want to be in it, but who will pay for it? Becomes the real question. And if those decision makers weren't at that meeting, are they getting the message? I think they are. I don't think they want to hear it. Now, there's not, believe me, a sort of intended to be a big whinge from some slighted director about the fiendish Hollywood studios. They are what they are. They're in the business of making money. As Dave said earlier, it's a business. They're there to make money. You know, the difficulties of differentiating a movie in an increasingly crowded marketplace enormously increase the cost of marketing them. As I said earlier, they probably spent close to $150 million to market Transformers. $100 million from marketing budget alone is pretty commonplace these days. So marketing skills have thus become the most highly prized talent in studio heads. They need to know this stuff. Where are the passionate mavericks, the kind of crazy, megalomaniacal, drunken, passionate fools, the guys who chewed fat cigars and thumped on things and mispronounced the English, the Louis B. Myers and Irving Thalbergs and all those great sort of monolithic maverick producers. Harvey Weinstein's out there, but even he's had his teeth pulled financially. Mostly now you have marketing guys, and a movie these days is simply a vertically integrated consumer product in an organization once great, once enormous, once magnificent. Universal Studios, Paramount Studios, Columbia Pictures. These are names to be conjured with. They're now tiny, relatively tiny small holdings in these gigantic, megalithic, multinational corporations. So, you know, what does one do about that? I understand their plight. They're doing their job. They have to answer to firstly to their shareholders, and only secondly, or possibly even thirdly, to their creative consciences, these guys. It's their job. I'm not holding it against us. These are the realities. And I think to simply blame the studios for the dearth of intelligent, thoughtful movies themed around war, or indeed any of the other pressing realities around us, actually is to duck the point. I think that you guys have to take some responsibility. I really do. I'll include myself, so you don't feel like I'm attacking you, because I'm not. But think about it. What's the target demographic for serious, thoughtful movies? It's not the 14-year-olds, it's you guys. And most people over the age of 25, because the moment you're over 25 in Hollywood demographic terms, you're older. It's tough. How many times have I heard people moan about, why aren't there any movies to go and see anymore? Why are all the movies being made for 14-year-olds? Why aren't there any movies for me to go and see? Fair point. I've also heard most of these same people go, God, I missed it. You know, I just couldn't get a babysitter. Or, you know, I used to go to the movies all the time. But, you know, now I just can't stand those awful queues. I'll just wait till it comes out on video and I'll see it on my 62-inch flat screen with the THX sound turned up high. Yes, guilty, as charged. I mean, we all are, frankly. And so, what we don't realize is that the fate of movies these days in this highly competitive marketplace is hugely, hugely, hugely dependent on how well it performs at the box office in the opening weekend. So if you, the target audience, don't show up because you're afraid of the queues or you want to wait till it comes out on DVD or you can't get a babysitter, guess what? The movie doesn't get made. Well, it doesn't get seen. If it doesn't get seen, it doesn't go into profit. If it doesn't go into profit, then movies like it will not get made again. It's truly that simple. So, people say we get the government we deserve. I also say that we get the movies we deserve. And I think we all need to take our share of responsibility for our movies. I think we need to, our cinema, the cinema, thoughtful cinema about war and its warriors. I think that we need to get off our asses and support the movies that we believe that we deserve. And then, and only then do I think, that we'll get the films that actually reflect not just our lowest common denominators, but, to stretch my mathematical analogy, our highest common factors. And I thank you all very much for listening, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you. Thank you so much.
John, thank you. I think there are some chairs at the front, incidentally. If people don't be frightened to take them, there are half a dozen chairs at the front if people want them. John, I think you've given us the recommendation, one of the recommendations for our Conflict, War and Culture programme.
Yes.
That we should, organisations like ours and people like us should demand that we not only that we support movies, but that it's not a passive process.
Yes.
It's a two-way process. Audiences have got to vote in this.
They have. And,
Yeah.
and you think because you're just sitting in a chair watching, that being an audience is a passive activity.
Yeah.
It's actually not. Because DVD sales these days don't actually account for the profitability of movies, I'm afraid. It's a great deal to do with theatre attendances. And word of mouth, too, in critically reviewed films. But what use is word of mouth? What use is it saying to your friend and neighbour, oh, you've got to go and see that film, if they're not actually going to get up and go see it anyway, because of all the reasons we just talked about.
Okay, thank you. We've got quite an audience here. Let me throw it open to the audience. I'm going to hold back on the questions that I've got. It would be useful if you'd identify yourself when you ask a question, please. One at the back there, is that Lee Willett? Yeah. Use the microphone, Lee.
Thank you. Lee Willett from the staff of the Institute. I found your talk to be fascinating, and I've got so many questions, but I'll try and keep just one. And keep it very quick and simple. The issue, I do agree, a small comment, I do agree on the issue of why people don't go, but I do wonder if we fall victim to the fact that we give them what we think they want, and therefore they go and do it. The same with reality TV and rom-coms. We think they want it, so we just make them for them. And maybe we need to be a bit braver. But I had a question about the UK in particular, and you touched a little bit on the issue of Afghanistan, and I think, obviously, for someone who works in the business, there is a direct daily interest in this kind of thing. But I found that I think there is a story. Maybe Afghanistan is a bit too close to home at the moment to be dealt with any kind of degree of seriousness for a whole host of reasons. But I think there is a really serious story to be told in the future about that. And I think one of the key issues in that is the personal level of the soldier's experience. And obviously, Restrepo is quite a powerful film in that vein. But the issue I had really was a question I had for you was to do with the UK's view on this.
Right.
We talked about big Hollywood blockbusters, but the UK has a story here, and there's not much that's come out from our side.
I agree.
You mean the UK film industry?
In the UK film industry, and I actually think that there is a potential opportunity, whether it's art house or something small or probably not bigger, for something from the UK's point of view on Afghanistan, because we have a terrible story to tell, I think.
Yes.
But if you had the chance to see the BBC documentary that ran a couple of weeks ago on helmet camera footage,
Yeah.
it was harrowing, horrific, powerful, everything. And I just wonder why that doesn't. Is there a story there that you think that could be told from the UK's perspective?
There was a long question, and you also raised a number of points I want to talk about. Firstly, T.P. Barnum had this, I find, kind of really sickening adage that nobody ever lost money underestimating their audience. And, that seems to be the adage by which a lot of TV and commercial cinema is abiding at the moment. And they seem to think that feed an audience pablum and they'll just want more pablum. We were talking at lunch about The Singing Detective. I never thought anybody would be interested in that film. Scabby bastard shouting at the camera and with the story jumping around everywhere. I thought the only people who would be interested in it were dermatologists and people with an interest in acrostics, I was humbled by the response that series had, as challenging and confronting and complicated as it was. I don't think it's true that we're necessarily giving audiences what they want. And if I'm right, then all audiences need to do is, in a sense, vote with their feet. I totally agree with you about Restrepo, which is a film I reverenced. I miss Tim Hetherington profoundly. His loss is really tragic because this is a documentary filmmaker with a dramatist's eye and the ability to dramatize the situation of ordinary soldiers out there oh my God, is it the front line? It was extraordinary. And by the way, situations more surreal and kind of wonderfully illustrative of the huge gulf culturally between Afghanistan and the guys waging a war for the hearts and minds than any fiction I can think of. I mean, those scenes where they're talking to the old men in the red beards about the dead cow, you can't dream stuff like that up. It's extraordinary. I would love to see films that are able to craft those stories. By the way, in Breaking the News, we start off with headcam sequence and follow the story of one soldier through the poppy fields, which they're setting out to destroy. And we use the headcam throughout. So it was a film in which I actually hoped to, in a sense, bring that first-person perspective very much into the foreground. The problem we come back to, even as an English film, even trying to cut this film right down, and make no mistake about it, war is not a cheap subject film. You need a lot of hardware, you need usually exotic and difficult locations, you need large numbers of extras. It's a complicated business filming a film about war, and even a relatively simple one can start to become quite expensive. Hurt Locker cost 11 million, but it's a very contained personal story with relatively little hardware in it.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I would just rejoice at seeing a British film about British soldiers in Afghanistan. It needs to be made. Their stories need to be told. Who's going to step up and say...
Well, it's outside the studio system, any way you look at it. The other thing is that there's one type of movie that I think does still get made, and that's the hoorah, no man left behind type of film. And that's because you want to think about the hero, and we're all coming home together. And it's usually an intimate, personal story of an everyman who's caught in extenuating circumstances and achieves and wins, and the brotherhood of it all. But to make one that's specifically British, I think it's going to be even more challenging. The studios are going to think that you're going to limit your demographic, and I think not necessarily seeing that we actually steal all your actors because we don't have any good ones of our own. But when it comes down to what John was saying about 70% of the movie being depending on foreign financing, it's going to be hard to make it British centric and be able to go out to a foreign sales market like Cannes or AFM and raise the money necessary to make a film. But if you have access to financing, just talk to me after, please.
Okay, question over here, and then I'm going to go to Simon Webb in the front row, and then I'll take some more over there.
Thank you very much.
Can you use the microphone?
Yes. Katja Gable, Konrad Adenauer Foundation in London. Thank you very much for a very inspiring pep talk.
Oh, good.
I just wanted to come back to one thing. You said 70% of all movie financing in Hollywood comes from foreign investors. Can you be more specific in that numbers? Where do they come from?
No, it's not foreign investors, but foreign sales. So basically, movies are marketed, are financed based on, frequently are based on predictions of foreign sales. And foreign sales, and Dave, you can add to all of this, used to constitute, the old formula was about 40% foreign, 60% domestic. That balance has shifted tectonically. And foreign sales now account for about 70, I think it's close to 70%. Far wiser, smarter, more numerate people than me have done the numbers on this. And what that's done is created this huge change, because foreign markets are mainly interested in star names. That's why there are 20 people that can basically determine whether a movie gets made or not, because they are bankable. Foreign. Studio head may go, I like this movie, but they have to then pick up the phone to their foreign sales department and say, can you sell this movie foreign and for how much? Never used to be that way, because it was a much smaller part of it. So, and foreign markets only want the actors they want in the genres they want. They don't want Bruce Willis. They want Bruce Willis doing his Die Hard thing. They don't want him being sensitive and thoughtful in a smaller movie. Bruce Willis sensitive. Sorry,
that's an oxymoron.
Sorry. Well, is it an oxymoron? Yeah, an oxymoron. It is. You're right. I was going to contradiction terms. Yeah. So that is the reality, and which is why I said the tale of foreign sales wags the dog of production.
Just so you guys get an idea, any movie over $20 million needs to have a domestic distribution partner, or you cannot get it financed. So if you're getting into a $50, $60, $70 million movie, you need to be able to make sure you're not going to be in the red. Once it's done. And the marketing and the P&A, as you were saying, $150 million for Transformers, it's a lot of money. But audiences are going towards what's pre-sold, what's safe, what's risk-averse. It's frustrating.
And as you say, war movies are expensive.
They're not cheap.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah. Journey's End is cheap. It's all in one. It's all
Absolutely,
in one
one
trench.
dugout,
Or in one dugout. But
yeah.
Anyway, but that's been done, of course, and it had to be done as an air film. It had to be done as First World War air races,
yeah,
wasn't
exactly.
it? Anyway, right. Simon Webb, ex-senior civil servant.
Taking as read, you read the market accurately because you're there all the time. I'd like to talk a bit about the interaction between news, live news, and movie market demand. Basically, my question is, does live, if you can see it live on TV, do not bother to see the movie because you've already seen the story? Or does it create a market in maybe the way that some of the newsreel footage of the Second World War did?
Rip from the headlines type stuff?
No, just that if...
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
That if you like them, and that maybe there's a risk that the armed forces, who are understandably nervous about the prospect we all know is just lurking there, of having the next major conflict played live to TV news round the clock with all the action in an uncontrollable way, including all the suffering and everything else, that maybe that action, which is something that is partly controlled, is actually reducing the market, because you could be having masses of exposure to, you could have had lots of Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya spread all over the TV, the news screens for the last 10 years. Right. And what would that have done? That's my question, is it?
Well, I think, again, it's a number of really, really interesting issues that you raise. Firstly, in a sense, the smartphone is transforming the landscape of cinema and maybe making even people, well, I mean, it seems ridiculous to say people like Tim Hetherington and Sebastian Junger redundant, but you look at that footage of a 16-year-old girl, Neda Khan, dying of a gunshot wound in a square in Tehran. And one image shot on a cell phone ignites an entire movement in Iran. You know, the power of those moments is extraordinary. And increasingly, people are capturing on you know, happen to be there. They capture on their cell phone moments of excruciating, powerful drama. And in ways that sometimes as filmmakers, it takes us a vast amount of effort to recreate, and we will frequently fall short. I actually studied that piece of footage of Neda Khan because I had a sequence in breaking news of a woman who is shot and actually dies on camera. And it's a really complicated issue. The other issue you raise, I think, is equally complex, actually rather more so, which is to what extent do the public have a right to know, and to what extent do the military and the media have the right to control what we know? No, and that is a topic for far longer discussion than we have even the beginnings of here, I think. It's a fantastically important topic of discussion.
Yeah. Just at that point, Major General Sir Michael Carlton-Smith is with us here. He's served on every continent in a number of countries. Michael, I just want to bring you in on this question of the depiction of violence. You've seen an awful lot of it in your career. Do you have a comment?
Michael, thank you for the commercial. I might add, I really can't speak in the way that my soldier father in 2 world wars, or my sons in topical wars could have done. But I think that actually, almost rather than answer your question, Michael, I'd like to talk about this business of financing, because clearly the creative talent and the ability to produce these amazing scenes today, the wizardry of the technology, means that violence can be depicted brilliantly, possibly overdone. I think that in the overdoing of it, one has to be sure that one's got expertise on the ground in the film, and I'm sure the industry does bring in the right people at the right time who know what it's like, and I'd perhaps like to hear that for sure that is the case. But in terms of funding, I wonder whether one couldn't go not to the traditional sources who don't now seem to be producing the money that you need, and go to other sources. There's a hell of a lot of money about in the world, Arab oil money, Chinese money. Are we going to the right places?
Well, you know, money follows money, as you know. And where a movie can be shown to be a profitable enterprise, both by precedent and by projection, yes. You can go to any businessman and say, this is where you should put your money, be they Chinese, Arab, or whatever. The problem is showing them those precedents. And as I illustrated with Hurt Locker, it's not an encouraging precedent. Restrepo, a brilliant film, a tiny, tiny market for that. So, you know, yes, I think we do have to be ingenious. Yes, I think there's a fascinating challenge for the armed services and the people who administer them to work collaboratively with filmmakers so that, you know, there's an exchange of resources and expertise, and there's an interpenetration of experience where both the service personnel can understand the requirements of storytelling. And there are times when actually I think fictional truth supersedes factual truth. You know, fiction can far more often illustrate deeper truths sometimes than fact. It's just the way it is. So I think I think there's an opportunity, and equally for service personnel to be embedded in a film unit. Fantastic, so that we're essentially absorbing osmotically that experience and the personality.
You were nodding vigorously, Dave, when you mentioned
there are a couple of things. We have actually explored, the Middle East as well as Asia for money. Actually, the company that I'm part of has several investors that are Saudi princes. They have to put their money through Abu Dhabi for cultural and religious reasons, but that is actually one of the sources of our funding. The second thing is in terms of Asia. Yes, we've gone there. I spent a week in Singapore beginning of December trying to tap into some of that money. There's a major problem with censorship as well. China, huge industry. Japan, not so much anymore. Korea, not so much. But for example, Red Dawn, which is a remake of an 80s John Milius film, was remade, and it's sitting now in the can, and they will not release it because of threats by the Chinese. It will not come out.
What sort of threats by the Chinese that they will disapprove of its distribution in some?
Well, listen, I'm not going to say this is fact, but my understanding is that the movie's shot, it's good, and it tested well.
No, do you know what they did? This is
what's going
fact.
on?
They
now it's
changed.
Fact.
They changed all of the red stars and the insignia on the uniforms. They CG'd, that's computer-generated imagery. They CG'd them out and made them North Korean, so as not to offend the Chinese.
Well, North Korea is less of an enemy, right? I guess, but I mean, so you understand what we're dealing with. I mean, it's pleasing everybody in censorship. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And so this film will just stay in the can until it goes into an art house.
It was supposed to be released in November of last year.
Okay,
and it's still sitting in the
can.
So
it'll be a historical curiosity at some time.
I have no idea if it's really going to make it out. The other thing is
about the first Red Dawn film was awful.
Really?
I'm sorry, I don't know if you worked on it. Oh,
I grew up on it. I grew up on it. But if you look at the 80s, Red Dawn, Top Gun, those movies are great advertisements for the United States military.
I'll give you Top Gun, but not Red Dawn.
Top Gun was great back in the day.
What you were saying, about violence is also really interesting, I think. And again, it's the difference between eroticism and pornography, between drama and melodrama, sentiment and sentimentality. They're all in the intention and the ways in which those things are used. Violence can be pornographic and exploitative. It can be unbelievably powerful and affecting. And, again, it's all about the thoughtful use of these elements.
Okay, lady here, and then Lord Truscott. Yeah. Just have a microphone. Thank you.
I'm Sabi Tibbets from UK TI, India specialist. It just struck me, following on from the discussion about other sources of finance, whether in fact some of the topics like Afghanistan, which are really pretty important to places like India, might get picked up by the Bollywood film industry. Whether that's been thought of or has happened.
Afghanistan the musical?
Might be acceptable. There are two sides to Afghanistan, actually.
Absolutely. You see a lovely film like Osama, and it's delightful.
MASH.
You just get very much get the sense of the other Afghanistan. No, it's intensely topical. There's a vast amount of money in India and movie money. Whether or not Bollywood per se could be harnessed to that particular cause, I doubt. Frankly, I think that's optimistic.
It's been attempted.
Sorry, what?
It's been attempted.
It's been attempted. Yeah. Okay. Right. Time for a couple more quick ones. Lord Truscott.
Peter Truscott. John, I think you indicated earlier that the US domestic market is becoming less important vis-a-vis the sort of global film market for Hollywood's sort of products. And obviously the world's changing with the emerging market. I think I read the other day that the Russian film market is worth something like $1 billion a year now. And of course we have China and India, as the last speaker mentioned. Is that influencing the sort of products and sort of films that you can sell in the future? Because it could be argued maybe the Russians and Indians and Chinese aren't really interested in seeing war films on Afghanistan, Iraq, or even sort of replays of the Second World War.
I think that's unfortunately true. The answer is yes, it's drastically influencing the kind of product that's getting made. International product requires international themes. and the sort of lingua franca of action, special effects, and explosions is a pretty powerful one. So yes, we're being encouraged in Hollywood to make more and more to make films that appeal to a particular kind of mentality. You look at a film like Wanted by a very stylish Russian director.
Timur Bekmambetov.
Thank you. Can never pronounce that name. It's a brilliantly done film. I think it's absolutely the pornography of violence. And to me, ideologically repellent, but clearly highly representative of a taste and appetite of a much wider audience out there.
Well, one thing just to mention, so everybody gets an idea of what actually does work in the foreign market, I think it'd be helpful, is a very universal archetypal themed movie like Taken. A guy who, has his daughter taken from him, and he will stop at nothing until that daughter is safe. Simple, clean, military background, touch on it a little bit so that we know he's got a skill set, and that's it. You're off. It doesn't touch it. And actually comedies don't do well. They don't travel. It's action, thriller, and like John said...
big visual effects movies.
Nothing about the war.
Okay. Let's take 2 or 3 quick questions. Okay, Andrew Somerville there. I'll take one at the back and one over here. Okay, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Somerville from RUSI. I just wanted to get your thoughts on why the film industry was taking such an opposite track to the computer games industry in terms of its use of war to sell, essentially, and whether you'd categorize that as...
You think of Call of Duty and
yeah, exactly,
all
and whether you'd categorize them as pornography of violence or and appealing to a lower common denominator than films are able to, or whether there's a deeper reason there.
I think the movie industry, I don't know whether you agree with it, is slipstreaming behind the computer industry as fast as ever its little feet can carry it. They keep setting, showing the way. The thing about Call of Duty, and Halo, which is a sort of sci-fi Call of Duty, and a number of other games that my kids love, is that they're highly, highly interactive. And one thing that even the advent of 3D in cinema has not been able to match is that tremendously interactive component that's so powerful for a younger, particularly male audience. I think they'd love to catch on to that. I do see one glimmer of hope, though, because I think that Dave and I may be sounding somewhat pessimistic about this. But the guys who made Grand Theft Auto have just come out with L.A. Noire. And that's not an anarchic shoot-'em-up crazed game. That's an astonishingly sophisticated, interactive sleuthing game where you are invited as the detective to watch the faces of the people you interview and decide whether or not they're telling the truth. If that's, if the computer market's once again ahead of the movie industry, then I think there's some hope for some more thoughtful, intelligent subjects targeted at that demographic.
Okay, gentleman at the back. Sorry.
You've explained very eruditely the finance and marketing problems for movies on war. How does that interact with things like the television series The Pacific, which appears to be functioning quite well as that? And are there any lessons between the interplay between those two situations?
Do you want to go for that, Dave? I'm happy to talk about it too.
Sure. In actuality, I think that like Band of Brothers and a lot of the series today, Dexter included, have more character development, and if you actually add up their budgets, they're very large. They have a lot of time to market, find their audience, and use the Spielberg, Tom Hanks name in terms of Band of Brothers and the Pacific. The Pacific did not perform as well as the Band of Brothers, but those, you really do need a big name like that behind it to pull the trigger. And if Spielberg had not been successful with Band of Brothers, and he and Tom Hanks had not put their name behind, with Saving Private Ryan, I don't think he and Tom would have actually been able to pull off Band of Brothers.
And television, half the movie industry is alive and well and living in television in America now. Feature film directors, major film actors that wouldn't have been seen dead in a television series 10 years ago, lining up now to be in television. Not only is it lucrative, but it's still a place where writers rule. The written, spoken word still has tremendous power, where serious themes can be developed. You can't imagine a movie like Mad Men. Who's going to make a movie about ad guys in the 50s? But in television, handled very, very carefully and elegantly, allowed to develop, these stories become absolutely mesmerizing. So television is still a place where you can go and tell serious stories. Army Wives, it's a huge success, and is in a sense breaking ground in television in a way that really cinema is not able to at the moment.
One thing that you said earlier that makes a lot of sense with TV, though, is it also has... Yeah, you did, always, John. TV has a better chance of finding its audience. John was making a point of opening weekend, and what happens opening weekend, and how that's actually going to really predict and affect the success of a movie. In TV, which is actually also getting away from the foreign conversations we've had, domestic actually still drives TV. So when I say domestic, I mean the American TV market. And then, yes, there is syndication, and it does go abroad. There is, ancillary revenue streams. But the truth is, 1, 2, 3, or 4 episodes, usually after the 4th or 5th episode, if it's not finding its audience, then it's axed. But it gets
unless
a chance.
It's HBO, and to their great credit, for example, Stuck by the Wire, which I do think is one of the greatest pieces of television ever made. They stuck by the wire for 5 seasons, although people in America just weren't watching. They believed in it, and they stuck with it. What movie studio would do that, or even what cinema distributor?
Okay, thank you. So one final question over here. Madam, there's a microphone on its way.
Hello, my name's Sam Williams. I'm a struggling writer and freelance journalist.
All writers are struggling.
A friend of mine is an actor in Hollywood, and we had a big discussion in Berlin about some of the things you're talking about. He said to me, it's writers' fault. These scripts don't get written, these kind of quality scripts. I just wondered if you would agree, or if you have any comments on that.
I would vigorously disagree. Writers need to earn a living. There's a certain extent to which they are obliged to try and go where the money is. Studios are no longer developing much in the way of scripts. They used to be able to go into a studio, pitch an idea. They used to go, I like that idea. I'm willing to pay $100,000 for a script. It takes a writer 6 months to write it, but they'll live on that $100,000. Not happening anymore. Studios have discovered, surprise, surprise, that they're not very good at developing scripts. They tend, their main answer to something being wrong in a script is to hire another writer. So more and more and more, they've shut down their development departments. What they've relied on is writers speccing their time, that's writing it for free, producers going out and finding foreign financing or co-financing, sometimes attaching actors that they want to make it with, before they'll even go, okay, maybe we'll make this film. So writers have a wives and children to support, and or husbands and children, or whatever. And they need to try and go where they have the most chance. Their script, that 6 months that they're going to spend writing it, has the most chance of being rewarded financially. But I can tell you from personal experience, there are dozens of great scripts out there, desperate to be made. There's a blog called No Meaner Place. Every week, she features a script that has not been made. And there are some honorable efforts in that, in there, I can tell you.
And the pool of writers is still very good from your perspective?
Yeah,
There's still people out there who are writing good stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd actually say more so than
a big pool, that's what I mean, not just...
There's a huge pool.
Right.
And they, writers also need the inspiration of seeing a movie, be it Hurt Locker or be it Babel or be it Saving Private Ryan, it doesn't matter. They need the inspiration to go, you know what, I can do better than that film. I want to write a film that's on that subject because I can do it differently or better or whatever. So excellence begets excellence. There's no question about that. But yes, they're out there in theirs.
Yeah.
And they're all struggling.
And Dave, you're optimistic? I mean, John sounds sort of cautiously optimistic if we understand what the industry is doing and how the industry is adapting. But you're at the front end of the adaptation of the industry. And I mean, you're at the money end, which is what drives it, as you said. Are you optimistic about the industry?
I am. It's coming around a little bit. It's been tough. You know, after 2008, everything was tough. But the film industry, no less. But as John said, you know, during a recession, people want escapism. So entertainment does offer that. And it's unfortunate that the business model has shifted to 70%. Everybody's become more risk averse, and that makes it even harder because actually the foreign market, we haven't even gone into this, has gotten worse and worse. I mean, the amount of money Japan used to pay for a movie 10 years ago is about 1/3 of what it was today. So I am optimistic. I also am very actually optimistic about TV. We started talking about that. TV is not broken. TV seems to be, you know, the best stories right now are coming out of TV as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. Okay.
But I am optimistic.
Yes. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to have to draw it to a close there. We've got a reception outside in the reading room that everyone's welcome to. But I think you've got us off to a spectacular start in our programme on conflict, war and culture. But not just with the hard realities of the industry, but also with an understanding of the processes and the creative issues that you have to address, whatever sort of movie you're making. We're obviously interested in movies that relate to our sort of subject of defence and security and these sort of issues. But I think you've given us a perspective which we can draw some real themes from, and one or two recommendations that we might actually make in terms of the fact that audiences are not necessarily passive, that the audience reaction is kind of important. You've also, you started off with all the disclaimers, and you've given us a briefing and a presentation that any of us in the building would have been proud of. And so on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much indeed. That was tremendous.
Thank you.